Ready? Okay. So welcome to everyone who's here at Logan with us, and welcome to the Zoom audience. For those of you who were here last night, we hope we have corrected some of the audio issues. Please let us know in the Zoom if you're still having issues, and we'll do what we can as best as we can to adjust and go as we go. I am Esther Peters. I am the Associate Director for the Center for East European and Russian Eurasian Studies at the University of Chicago. And it is really exciting to both have people in the Zoom audience and in person for our first Series of Voices event of this academic year. Series of Voices is an author-centered series of readings and conversations on books from or about Central and Eastern Europe, Russia, Central Asia, and the Caucasus. Our long-term partner for this series is the Seminary Co-op Bookstores, the first not-for-profit bookstores whose mission is bookselling. The stores, I just realized I have an old note here. They are no longer closed for sale, so you can go into the bookstores. If you want, you can still also order books online and find out more information about events they are supporting either in person or virtually on their website. And you can find out more information about at ceeres.uchicago.edu about some of our events. Two things I'd like to point out related to this series is next week, we will both have an in-person and virtual event with Cynthia Haven about her new book on Czesław Miłosz called Czesław Miłosz, A California Life. And then the following week on November 1st, we will have a purely virtual event on Zoom with Russell Scott Valentino, and he will be discussing his translation of Milenko Yergovich's novel Kin with Angelina Ileva and Nato Petkovic. So both of those information, we'll put some links for those in the virtual audience. We will put links in the chat very soon. Today, we are excited to welcome Kate Brown to discuss her book, Manual for Survival: An Environmental History of the Chernobyl Disaster. She is the Thomas M. Sable Distinguished Professor in History of Science at MIT. Professor Brown's books have won numerous prizes and been translated to many languages, so I'm not going to try and list all of them. For them, at least I will mention two related to Manual for Survival, which was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award and was a finalist for the Kapuczynski International Award for Literary Reporting. Today, she will be joined in conversation by Professor Fredrik Albritton Jonsson, an Associate Professor of History at the University of Chicago. He specializes in British history with a focus on questions of environmental science and political economy in the period of 1700 to 1900. And two last notes before I turn things over to the reason you're all here. We will be raffling off up to 10 copies of Manual for Survival. So if you're interested in getting a copy of that book, if you're in the in-person audience, go ahead and send me an email, respond to the email I sent you earlier today. If you're in the virtual audience, please put your name and email address in the chat box and we'll include you in that. And then for both the in-person and virtual audience, we will have time for questions at the end. For the virtual audience, please use the Q&A box if you can, and we'll read them at the end when we have time. So with that, I will turn things over to the reason we're all here.
Okay, so good to see you. Yeah, I hope the Zoom audience can hear us fine. Please shout if there's a problem. We had some issues last night. So as Esther said, I'm Fredrik Albritton Jonsson. I teach a course on energy, that's long little thing. It is such a delight and honor to be here. We're going to spend maybe the first half hour in conversation, and then we'll open it up to the audience. So Kate suggested to me that we talk about the anthropocene, and I'm more than happy to do that. It's one of my favorite subjects. So maybe we should say something for members of the audience who are not clear on what the anthropocene is. Take a stab at
Sure, you can amend as you like, but I mean, simple answer is it's here to shift, it's a proposal to shift to a new scene, a whole scene here, and there's humans are driving, and they're determining the geologists now if that should be the case, then we take a vote on it. I was trying to imagine historians taking a vote on any kind of theory of evolution. What a funny thing that would be. So they're gathering information and then we're going to take a vote, and then part of that vote is that they give us the time. It seems like 1950 is where they came.
That's an extraordinarily odd idea of a sort of bureaucratic vote on when to locate period. That's still possible. But yeah, we're going to do that, right? And that's the point of this is to find evidence in the sediments of a durable global movement, the golden spike, if you like, where we can see this new human. Sometimes it's called the geological agency. The agency here, I think, should not be understood as agency in the moral or political sense. Right? It's the collective impact on the system. So think of us rather in the objective sense of almost like an asteroid style impact. So the geologists are hard at work trying to define this stratigraphic signature and locate it in a moment in time. Meanwhile, the question is, how should historians see this?
Yeah. I was at a conference of food ethics and working group a couple weeks ago in Berlin, and they in interesting ways just automatically talk about their archive. And their archive in ice core. The sedimentary core, and they talk about the integrity of the archive. And I found that an interesting use of that term that we see in such different ways. But my sense is those of us in the humanities think about it. For me, over the last 10 years or so, becoming acquainted with that term has really fundamentally shifted the way I see what I do, both the topics that I choose, but also my way of going about it. As I was talking about this a little bit last night, of turning to landscapes to think of them as archives to help me cross-check the textual sources that I'm getting and the oral histories that I'm getting. Humans distort pictures depending on where they stand in the moment they are, their political orientation, etc. Can we use ecological archives, the geologists, to sort of cross-check these sources to focus on it? And as we know, because of the Anthropocene, there is so much in that sedimentary layer that's driven by humans, that's out there by humans. If you
turn down the echo, there's too much. Sorry, we're having all of a sudden having sound issues despite sound check earlier today. Apologies for that, as well as to the Zoom audience. So we're going to try.
Maybe we should say something. Is it sounding better? Audience on Zoom?
That sounds better to me.
Okay.
How about, and then the Zoom audience, can you let us know? Keep talking.
Yeah. So I slightly lost my thread. I suppose for me, the big challenge is to, on the one hand, to speak to scientists. And you do that all the time. I speak a lot to scientists, except they're all dead. I work on 18th and 19th century science rather than present. So that's the one area of connection. But there's also a problem within history, I think. We touched on this before. How do we convince our colleagues who don't know much about planetary scales that this really matters? I think this book might just do the trick of translating between these scales in a way that really appeals to colleagues across the board. I wonder if you have any thoughts on this.
I think, that's, I think the problem is larger than within the history profession. The problem is within our society. lots of people go about as if this climate change problem doesn't happen. And sometimes, good part of my day, I go about as if this climate change. And so how do we shift that to become part of our main focus, but also focus of our daily lives? And how do we shift that before the emergency is upon us and we have no choice but to? And that's, I think about that all the time. And so I don't know, I mean, I don't think one book would convince our colleagues who've been drawing in intellectual history or other things, history, biographies to suddenly shift. And my hope has always been that environmentalism was incorporated into larger histories, just like race and class and social history has. And the state of history is associated with gotten more capacious and really lovely ways, I think, as we borrow tools from other things and stuff. So it's always been my hope that environmental history doesn't have to stand out as its own thing. That is another tool that exists. I mean, lately I've been working on this project. It started out as what I call the plant people, but really what I've done is to put plants at the center of my focus, and looking at plants in city environments. And just by doing that, I suddenly see so many things I've never seen before. And maybe that's one way. We're very human focused, and that's the nature of humans. So maybe if we start to reach out to other species that share this planet and put them in the focus of our studies, even though we can't speak to them directly, we don't understand them, we have to learn a lot about them. But once we do, just okay, what about the plants? I started to come across whole new questions. Still coming in. Whole new driving force behind society.
Yeah, this leads me to a question about the title of your book, which at first blush, you might think it's ironic. It's a failure of informing the public, misinformation, suppression, knowledge, etc. Disaster. But there is another story in your book about resilience, about living in the ruins, and seeing the ruins. I want to comment.
Yeah, when I first conceived this project, I thought what I wanted to do was circumnavigate the three different and look at these people who are survivors, uppercase letters, because they've lived in this place, that experience. That's where trench warfare laid out. Barbed wire is still there, admired in the swamp. The Civil War ravished that territory, the Polish-Soviet War, famine of 1932, especially hit that territory, these deportations of national minorities, and then finally genocide and another Civil War going on between Poles and Ukrainians, and then finally the biggest. And so I thought these people really know how to survive, and I want to go ask them as we face this improving climate change. I want to ask them how they did that. And then, as I went, there was going to be a quick little book I was going to have this information, right? It never happened, right? And I quickly went to the archive, and this is what came of that. But that was my original conception: is that these people are experts in survival. And we can learn from them. And so one narrative line to this book are all kinds of people I found in the archives who were concerned citizens. They might have been farmers and might have been nurses and doctors and radiation monitors, a town clerk, and they just stopped and said, no, we can't continue as we are here. Not minimize this. I can't cover this up for you. I can't misreport it. And they insisted on learning more. They went to great lengths. Some of these people are also journalists. They risked their jobs. they didn't risk their lives. I mean, some of these scientists later, when they asked these Soviet scientists, the big guys, like, why didn't you tell the truth? And they said, well, we would have been shocked. And you see this in the HBO movie, this guy pulls out the gun and playing. That's not true. Nobody's getting threatened with going to Gulag or prison at that time or being shot. Absolutely not. But people were getting fined. They were getting demoted. So a few people got fired, but that's quite rare. But they did take risks to their own personal, security. Not personal security, but like their stability in their lives. But they did it. And that's where those everyday heroes runs as a thread to this book. And they are people who figured out how to survive and broadcast that message to their fellow citizens. I think it's really important.
Is this our future? Figuring out how to survive for examining in a kind of post-apocalyptic with ruins and
I mean, I think we all found out in the COVID episode that we suddenly have to consider ourselves much more science. We now, we know names of pharmaceutical companies we've never heard of before, and we now know how viruses work, and that they have little, some of them have little shorty shapes.
Your cells, all those kind of things. I think as one of the features of the amputee, you still want that sound from me, Esther? It's really bugging. I'll keep talking.
There seems to be an open mic somewhere that you can't quite figure out where it is. So you're coming in and out, both of you are coming in and out, but we're not exactly, there seems to be a mic, despite nothing being on any of our laptops, there seems to be a lot of time.
Okay, all right. Yeah. So I think that's one of the features of the amputee that humans are driving the planetary forces. It's human technologies and human science that's behind. And if we're going to understand how to survive, we're going to have to understand more about human science and technology. So I'm somebody never had a class in physics, never could pass a math class, but I've had to learn. I've had to school myself to write some things on these topics and try to figure out what's going on. And it's not rocket, but even if it was rocket science, maybe figure out enough not to perform, not to build rockets, but to understand how they work and understand maybe some potential problems and pitfalls.
Part of that exploration, and perhaps the core thesis of the book seems to me at least to be kind of discovering that Chernobyl is not a unique event, but rather has to be placed against a backdrop of fallout and nuclear testing, atmospheric testing that goes back to the 50s. Right? So in some sense, the book is about reconstructing the true baseline of our planetary impact, at least in the nuclear dimension. Does that?
Yeah, absolutely. We think of Chernobyl as the world's biggest nuclear accident, and maybe in terms of accident it is, but the really bigger story behind it is this colossal volume of radioactive fallout that was intentionally spilled into the atmosphere, this frenzy of nuclear attack that exposed all of us, so that now we all have radiation in our bodies. And when I watch those geologists in Berlin give the report, and what they're looking for are signals that happen that appear at one time all around the Earth. And so if you have a signal that appears, in 1850, and then we see it again in 1950, that doesn't work. It has to be the same time period, and it has to be planetary. And the one thing they found with all these GSP sites, really strong signal, and it really starts to show up everywhere around 19.
And my sense is that as historians, we might well want to go before 1950, thinking about the Anthropocene. Obviously, planetary effects materialize at that point in a new sense, but we might have to think about the Industrial Revolution and even farther back. Some people were just talking about scientists with the 1610 as the origin of the Anthropocene. That's maybe an interesting scholarly issue, but I've always also felt that 1950 or thereabouts is a good baseline and a good public point of view to take, because we desperately need to memorialize, so to speak, what we're losing, what we've lost. In other words, we need to know what the Holocene used to be like before the global weirding of things. And Dipesh Chakrabarti and I have joked that we need museums of the Holocene now. Not museums of the Anthropocene, but the Holocene, that remind us what it would be like to walk through, to drive a car in 1970 and have the wind, all the bugs on your glass, or what it was like to listen to bird song in a meadow in 1952. All these things that are in danger of slipping away, they have to be, I think that's the task of the historians, to weave into a new planetary story of what's getting lost, and maybe also with some hope of what can be saved.
Yeah, and in this book, I'm really concerned about, that baseline of Holocene records, like what it meant to be human to health, and before these toxins saturated. And so, one GSP marker, phytogardening, should be the human body, because everything we see in the landscape are also in the landscape of the body, circularly. All these anthropogenic substances are green through our body. We all have lots of black mental radiation, toxic chemicals. Everybody, the NIH supplement PPD in the body, in the body. So how does that change how it feels to be? There's no more bugs on our windshields, but there's also no more assuring that we sort of live a full, healthy life. Like my mother turned 91 yesterday, and I'm not sure I was with the track record like around me.
You said in Shulman yesterday that you felt like you've written 4 books that are all a little bit on the gloomy side, maybe. So I wonder if I could stimulate you to think about what it would be like to write hopeful books in the Anthropocene.
Yeah, I think you do need to write. I find myself, with the Anthropocene reporting, climate change reporting, I can't take it, even though that's my job. To take in this information. It's really heavy, it's really hard. And so I've been looking for ways to think about how to tell hopeful stories that are also realistic, that aren't sort of naive and goofy. And it's really challenging to think about because as we think about how I myself and the Indians who do take action in our own personal lives, in the backdrop of that story is this blooming farm. And so there's always, there is some gloom still in the background, just to make me happy, to get my myself. But so hopeful stories are stories where you don't have to depend on just what the experts say, or you don't have to wait for the UN to pass or to think about in Glasgow to pass some resolution that we then wait and we all solve the problem. Hopeful solutions, those solutions where we can take action right here in our communities, and that would enrich our life in the short term and make our ecologies, our local economy sustainable, relocalize our economy so that we can flow of them. We're not waiting for cargo ships in LA, things like that. Things that I think make people anxious and make people angry and have all kinds of conflicts.
May I ask about the new project in that?
Sure.
Yeah, 5 people.
Yeah, it started out being called Plant People, and now I'm finding out little gardens everywhere, and it's kind of what I'm interested in is looking at plants in city spaces, and what I find are little gardens everywhere. The people living alone there at the time are growing substantial quantities of what city dwellers are eating in this, and they're doing it without much fanfare, without much commercial or financial apparatus behind them. They're doing it often without much sort of municipal or governmental support. They just, the story starts in late 19th century in Paris, where 5,000 Indian farmers are growing into 2 million regions and have export an unfulfilled to London. They're doing this by using the technology, growing megalopolis, and using the resources that humans what's called the metabolic rift. They're taking all these, all the resources from soils over there, and they're shipping them to cities where they become waste streams, or they take these waste streams and they recycle them in depression. Using forestry as a boiler, using soil off season to grow really to press the seed, and the microbes will heat out, create a form of energy, and then we pack it with a liquid glass and then push the seed in. And so, and they use courtyards to trap suns and passive heating, passive solar projects on 300 kilometers, what they call wall orchards, about fruit flowing against like this walls of the form and ripen as if they're in town. And that all dies out with the car. There's no more orchard and power that project. And then so my story shifts to Washington, D.C. in the 1910s, 1920s, when all these soil refugees are coming into these American cities who were farmers, who've been fished off, who've been exhausted soil elsewhere, and they find themselves in the city, but they still keep farming. And I find that in D.C., for instance, there's a historically Black neighborhood, and Black people are coming in, they're buying not one tenth of an acre lot, but 2-6. They put a huge tiny house on it, and they farm or garden grass with some chickens and a few hogs. And when the people went in and interviewed them, and I could suddenly think, what were your jobs? In 20s, they were like, we didn't have any jobs. And well, how'd you get by? Well, we do our own food. And we had some chickens. We had one hog a year after everybody. And then we sold the surplus in the market, and that helped pay the debt. And what I find, a geography student helped me master, is that rates of homeowner occupancy were the highest in this neighborhood in DC, second highest in the whole neighborhood, more than the white work things. And so that really keyed me into how this sort of vegetable power well really helps people thrive. This continues until the 1950s and gets shut down real by short time. And then so my story so far has shifted to the Soviet Union, where I thought this would be a story from the 80s and 90s, that people went out to gardens when the Soviet Union collapsed, or before the agriculture collapsed. But what I find is that all along, there are all kinds of types, all kinds of effects, starting with the revolution in the Civil War. And people went and they gardened right on the houses, they gardened in the very urban periphery of the city, and they formed this economic pyramid, penning down the decade to produce 30 to 50% of the food that people consume in the Soviet Union, maybe little tiny gardens that they had. And that story comes with, a lot of state legislation and support to promote that project. They snowballed upward into past the collapse of the city.
Where they got from the Chernobyl events.
Well, I was thinking about that blueberry picking project, and sort of thinking of plants as allies. And I think artists and writers have done a good job in the last 10 years or so, helping us to understand what scientists are coming to understand, that plants are sentient, and that they communicate among each other, about species, that they can learn and they have memory, and that some scientists need very attention. And artists and writers are helping us with that the Powers Over story. There's a new memoir by Judy Schmard called Finding the Mother Tree, or helping us to understand that the plants are very dramatic. Kind of like researchers and writers helped us understand that orcas, whales weren't killer whales, whales are very certain function beings, and they just howl. a little bit harder for humans to understand plants that don't seem to do much. But when you start to work closely with plants, you realize they do a lot, and they really, and I was just delighted in my own gut what these plants are up to, and all these problems that they solve that are in plants. So that's what got me started. Like, what if I put plants in the sunshine store? What do I find?
I really want all of the attention. Maybe we can open it up to your own. I underlying those two features a basic agreement, geological impact of video. The point of contention is usually the wish or the humanity, with this. They're disgruntled with the idea that somehow the species great, but I think most scientists are speaking all across the things like that. He said in one of the early launch of the drugs, about a quarter of that falls into the garden.
Yeah, so whether there's a better name to describe that, chemically maybe is a good name, but then if you believe that the Soviet Union was a socialist economy, their CO2 impact is huge. And so maybe that's not right. Okay, and there's a sense of like, Fredrik's is saying that all these people are getting lumped into the who aren't responsible for it. But we do find that as this sort of path of development comes to their part of the world, they're hopping on that train. So we are starting to see it doing there. Here's the global anthropos that involved in the conduct of elevating temperatures and saturating them. Here's the big Yeah, this is a study, it's a great question. And this is a study I've never seen anyone do, but we know from the biologists who have been in Chernobyl zones that plant life, tree get stressed out and they don't grow as fast. They're big, they have a densely packed. And they're more vulnerable to life disease. So then large, what you have are forests that are less healthy than the trees dying faster. And if you look, like one of the big problems with the this forest fire that we've seen in the West Coast and into the Pacific Northwest is there's a beetle that's taking out tree after tree. And so you have these forests that have every tree dead. And it's, or whole blocks of trees, you fly over this red, these trees haven't died. And then when fires come, they're just tinder sitting there. And the question is how much of the toxins that we put in this environment, the radiation and other toxins. There's a big trees in the New York Botanical Garden that have never been logged. The old growth trees right outside of New York City are dying because of the toxins of the traffic that there's running. So how much of that is then, a synergistic effect that's accelerating function that you have fewer or capture CO2 and to help us on. That probably you can use there to make that problem and leading to something that is everything for even at a time, so you always make that daily. But it's like finding the better thing, maybe you know there will be time after you figure it out for the meaning that in literature and work is just there's a lot of the organizations, places that are attempted, they people not do that and then people in the game one people other. And so no, I know a lot of people that thought really be a red meeting. Explore about that in 16 and all the environment. I sometimes wonder about these properties of these opinions, huge and bad versions for me. Now, the heavy feelings are what would your museum and policy look like?
As you were speaking, I suddenly remembered a friend of mine, Jason Kelly, who runs the Humanities Center. Minneapolis. They've been actually not in creating a museum in the conventional sense, but in placing around the city markers for the average water level increase to give people a sense of how often they flood than usually. So this would be it's not quite citizen science as it was, but it's a public reminder, have it in mind what everyone knows, and the reminder of how it's
I mean, I do think that that's the memorializations. It's powerful, and think of all the 9/11, not enough, and maybe. Xenophobic America was right for that kind of, maybe you have to have the climate that everybody's like, yeah, I gotta go. I mean, I've really been struck by how many new kind of tourists live in New York City now to go to Ground Zero and how patriotic Americans who would never have gone to Sodom and Gomorrah before that. But if you question me, we're good with that field. Memorialize something that society to think about, and having a monument, you have to walk by daily, it can become invisible unless we have the awareness of that could be to it. My hope is that as people start to have their own personal brush with climate change episode. Maybe our work is to make sure that people make those connections. All of a sudden, Mississippi flood something like many years. How do you make a marker monument? But that's that. And the thing about monuments is they're so solid, and it feels like it's a voice coming from on high. The days about monuments not including a flag. But they do feel more official than from each training and from the voice in the blog, that's in the program or maybe I just like a lot of people kind of plan and Peter, so anyway, my one of the things that's realizing that while we do that, issue is on so one that's and other than
like, and there's different things that are applied. So, I mean, I feel like when I was looking about it, I thought like I'm not sure grow and quiet whatever you want to call it, but I have to speak of the voice. So I'm the thing with you still bigger question or right, some problems that are and it's a between that there's always the helping the problems that happen. And you know that we're all thinking, but for a long time, you know that, and then also, so how, I basically know exactly what you're talking about, or what you're talking about, how we can grow it, or whether it's a person, the reference, we take off, and
It's a great question, right? So you're positive that he's kind of organic with things like and come up and so you can go on. You're passionate about and come up with the third absolutely. I assume that people all over the place talk about where differences are from and they're not from, they're overlooked.
I don't really get on the big usually but you can get out and good right then you can throw it on the top. After bringing that in, always in the top, I think that ends up with the recipe that book is right to that and the certain type of you shouldn't let those out and you're whatever it is, you're not very I'm not saying that
Yeah, well, you know, I've long been an advocate that everything we write as scholars, for almost everything we write as scholars, should be publicated. It should be able to be read by junior and high school in any publication. And the reason that's important is exactly so that this, you know, don't have much in the way of investigation. And we're what some of the few people in society lots of you take a year and run through 2 years off and really dig deep into a topic. And we get engrossed in the details, but when I write, I'm often telling myself simple. So that I can synthesize complicated information. I can write about more detail article than somebody else and specific why I meant, but the reader I'm trying to envision the company and synthesis and understanding the issue and people like, but I think we're some of the few people at the time and probably luckily be finding it really. And for a long time, academics would say, well, that would I release my credibility. I'm supposed to be objective. I'm supposed to tell side, you know, the pro and the con and weigh the different voices and there's a lot to be said for that. Or at the same time, we all know we pick winners and losers and cheer for some people in our industry and other people who maybe don't think are right. So one way I've gotten around that is I don't pretend to be objective at all. I put myself in my text and I say, you know, after having studied this is what I think. And you can see how I've come to the conclusion and you can decide whether or not I'm right or wrong. But I want you to see my prep so that you can evaluate what I've gotten to. And in that way, I think we can sort of get around these problems of not feeling like we need to be the ultimate authority and like nobody can follow law, that we have to be some country. One of the things that puts an obstacle between scholars and public is these legitimizing tactics that you need. But we're taught to use. I'm taught to use in practice. One would think, you believe, and we argue like you believe, you know, never sort of admitting that one mistake in your research that you have silly assumptions you made and that didn't pan out, that you can cultural missteps, that you partner people accidentally, you have judge people, all those things I think should go into it. That was but the third person voice, like who is that third person omniscient voice? Who is that name? I'm always wondering. Who never makes any mistakes, but it's always known, kids are always knowing this information, they can still don't probably hit fire. All of those are distancing techniques, legitimizing techniques that push the reader away. I'm a smart authority, you don't know that about it. And I think come back down there.
In Reginald, she talked about last night too. How
Yeah.
the elderly woman and somehow lives through all these disasters with drought forage. And forages, that's it. Makes it live, obviously condition you have this, there is it feels like a moment in the book that's absolutely essential. It's also a surreal moment, and there's a moment levitating above the story. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I was trying to think about time, how time works, and how we sort of flatten time in our histories, and we're sort of pointing to an arc at the end of something that is retribution. The thing, I got to take circular. There's all kinds of things. So I was trying to show how her life stayed the same, her peregrination, daily peregrination, almost never changed. She almost never, she only spent 2 months away from her village in 1970. It's amazing thing. But yet, all the landscape around her, she drank. And so the tanks were in, the tanks were out, and bulldozers in it, and she stayed. And not much about, I mean, I'm sure great things about her thinking like kitchen, but, I go there and I see this person, and she, studying the kind of employment. In terms of interesting. So I was trying to sort of think about how to use time, how to experiment, how to sort of different kinds of finalities. And I'm not sure it was successful, but it's fun to experiment with. And I thought I'd get my editor or readers who'd say, she can't levitate, that's a magical realist moment, get it out of there. And I didn't have that happen. And so maybe it's possible for us to play around a little bit, experiment a little bit more. With our narrative. I started this, I had this episode where I sent a play to the AHR, to the staff to publish, and it was a play form, it was a screenplay, but it was all history. It was nonfiction and fiction, And I was only the AHR, and we expected them to go, gently. But, and I wrote in my introduction to it, and sent it to the HR, and I know you only have history in this one format, you lay out your argument in something with historiography, and then you lay out your primary part of it, and then you state your argument again, and you put a flag on it. I think this is doing that. But I come across, even I wrote the play, I came across this top secret Politburo document that I had to buy from this woman because she had taken it out of the family in 1999 with States falling apart. He's sitting on Belgium in Moscow, and she had to pay 600 euros for it. She didn't money for thyroid surgery. So here I am paying for archival document that I can't verify. And there have been excerpts of it and some that she had published, but I wanted to keep it on 45-page. And the dialogue between Gorbachev, there, all the big guys are there, and they're discussing that who's responsible for the Chernobyl accident. And they're saying, well, we've had the diamonds really bad, and we've had this problem before, and we've had dealt with the problem before, and we've had to inform the plant operator that they were just critical flaw in the reactor. But at the end, and so, you know, there's a whole string of problems. At the end, they decide, well, we're just going to blame the plant operators and bring them to trial, and so they did that. So but the reason why a screenplay I thought was a great format for that was because I could have these guys on stage talking, you know, having their discussions, and it's all like verbatim with the transcript that they had, the words that they spoke. But then I could have the light go down on down and the light come up on an engineer who wrote a long letter explaining what had happened to his leaders that I found in the archive, and I could have him come on stage and say, you know, there was nothing in the manual that said when you drop down and you lift up more than 15 control rods from the reactor that there would be like an explosion, that you can't bomb on it. You know, you needed something. So he could have his, and he wrote that letter 7 or 8 years after that literally. So I think the stage helped me tell the story out of context. So I thought there was actually a pretty good reason to have this, not just in queue, but a pretty good reason historically, methodologically, to have this be screenplay rather than the same kind of page or article. Well, my article did get rejected. But I was pointing out to Al Fixenson, the editor, I'd like, look at these really long, angry rejection letters. You get rejection letters often, and these people are engaged. And he's like, yeah, that's right. And so I thought that was instructive. And so what grew out of that back and forth with Alex is you created a new section of the AHR called History and Natural and so now I'm having a promotion of the section. This is a little commercial break. But I invite you all to think about ways that maybe the stories you are telling have a specific blueprint, a vehicle to tell them that's specific to the story that. And there isn't a boilerplate for the way you write in history, but that each topic suggests its own narrative format. And so History and Classified we created sort of to give, it's just 2,000 to 5,000 word essays. It doesn't have to have a big footnote apparatus behind it. And we created it as a way for historians to experiment with fragments. I could think of new ways that you can tell your maybe as a proposal for monument. Monuments at all, monuments all kinds of people. Including drawing, that there's many different ways we can approach history, and if we do that, maybe we can reach different kinds of things. I don't like your passion. It's so hard. You know, market I have. And I did some really interesting actually. I really say about this Lord comes and get there. And it's very valuable. What you right, we're not survival. And there will be more and more and about that. It's not. They don't see me that. It's going to go on. It is. It's how you understand it. No people don't know that. That was very expensive. We believe that. The particular difference now is I read this. Very really not. With every today's field, in fact, look at that. I feel fun. I said, why are these things? Then the world is very much like everything is wrong. You look at your last thing you do is so it's then I already able to everything because I have
I know the people who can have it out. There are so many of us that want to there's it's really funny. It's many for that. But I really think that it's not.
I hear your thought in there, Norma, that survival and will can be instrumentalized in even later, but okay, you're surviving, go back there and figure out how to live on that. When you're on your own with that, this kind of thing, and then it's frightening, and I wouldn't want to be complete by of an advocate here. I think in the Shulman place and in the Chernobyl example, it would have been far better to evacuate much larger tiers there than our state. But that, sort of is considered untenable. See, it doesn't happen. And so then we fall back on thinking that we survive and but it's not pretty, and I hope that no one can wait 3 months now to survive on thinking that any kind of survivor citizenship, temporarily view one of people do live on average, longevity expectancy is that they're going to have 15 years shorter life, and already even shorter lifespan and basically. And then what that shorter life also includes many pivots regarding on oneself and one's kid and because you all something one for the problem many private fantasy for difficulty in finding. But I don't think it's in the book because it was anecdotal. But as I traveled around in Syria with the survivors, I picked up the bus service when we worked, especially in Belarus. And so at bus stops, there would be people flagging for the drive. And I'd pick up usually women and children. And everybody we picked up on probably 30, 40 people. They were all happened to be traveling between medical service teams and every last one. And then what we would get is I could never get right. Or I'm just post-op from heart surgery, and I'm sure coming down with the big. So that I didn't put in the book, but what I was running the archives, the stories I was hearing, it sort of bolstered my conviction that having to have that first of all, with these microns you heal. And then having the ability to wrap up with a feel. So you're saying you should be memorializing concepts that should be fading away. Right? The way we Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it's a pretty important.
I'd like to hold that important word, what if you should flourish in value? People come to the science, only said that people actively thinking on these lines. Jason Pilgrim, really setting forth basically universal model of development in the context of climate variability. Now, this may never come true on certainly taking a noble illusion. And then there's a second way of thinking, like much closer to what I'm saying and Ron Howard and also live in the island and in the balance. I don't know. It sounds like you are in Chernobyl looking, it's better in the second current, like a new project on Black's like in more fun.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I like about this project is that it describes all these people who are sort of returning their back on the prevailing conflict in that society that have to be nationally, flat, belonging in this abstract concept that we're taught that that's how we go on. Because that's, like in the school now, turning their back on market economy or socialist would be the reasons we should have. And they're just off doing their own thing, pulling wealth from out of the air, literally. Mining the nitrogen from the air, and phosphorus and jasper from the soils produce wealth that they then trade for other forms of cultural goods and things happening. Medical, fantastic medicinal properties have come from this garden. And what I guess sort of appeals to is that all these intractable problems that we have to do with, governments and xenophobia, the nationalism, and sort of warring, the people are just like, I'm going to go and Voltaire would be kind of poverty. And when I first read that, I thought that was, him cynically and joke. But now when I read more about Voltaire, I realized that towards the end of his life, he took television and really started to reconceive of the society by thinking about intimately law. And that's what I would love to see in where humanity go in general as we start to see plans and securities like that in the future. We might start to have a different relationship to the older we are going through the landscape, and it shows all that fire. That'll be kind of like going out and shooting at the rear. And then just changing our sentiment and like the emotional and imagination, as we've seen with other projects.
This seems like a good, hopeful way to end the conversation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all for your questions, and thank you all.